Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Is the U.S. fighting the Islamic State or hoping to rearrange the order in the ever-volatile Middle East? Is Syria the real target? And what about Obama's coalition of the willing? Upon close inspection, it appears to be a coalition of the reluctant. To crosstalk the Islamic State, I'm joined by my guest, Scott Rickard in Orlando. He is a former American intelligence linguist. In New York, we have Joe Lauria. He is a foreign affairs correspondent. And in London, we cross to Nadim Shahadi. He is an associate fellow of the Middle East and North Africa program at Chapman House. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules. In fact, that means you can jump in anytime you want, and I very much encourage it. Scott, if I go to you first in Orlando, in 2008, presidential candidate Obama said the war in Iraq was a dumb war. Is this a dumber war?
Well, a matter of fact, it's a much dumber war. Here we have, an entire society being destroyed again. They've destroyed another country here in Syria, and now they're going back into Iraq. And Iraq is just in chaos right now. The military is in chaos. They've destroyed entire infrastructure in the north, and now they're going after bases that's south of Fallujah. This week, or excuse me, actually, sometime in the folks out at the UN, when Cameron was speaking, he was saying that they were trying to reconstruct and they were trying to actually pacify the region. This is ridiculous. You're not reconstructing the region by shipping in, tons of weapons and arming these individuals, even in Iraq, and also for the last 4 to 5 years in Syria. And these aren't Syrians. These are foreign invaders. These are foreign mercenaries. Over 80 countries are involved in this supposed ISIS mercenary group. So, yes, this is a very dumb war. It was created by the West and their Gulf state allies. And these Gulf state allies now are going after their wild dogs that they've built. And this is something that could have been avoided by not actually fabricating a war against Syria. This Syrian war has destroyed the country, and it's destroying the region. And to say that you're going to be the ones to go in and reconstruct and pacify the region, you're the one inflaming it by putting these kinds of weapons in the hands of these individuals.
Let me go to Joe in New York here. I mean, hasn't the West done enough for this region, particularly since the end of the Cold War, particularly in this century? I mean, this is the 4th president of the United States in a row to go on national television and saying, I'm going to bomb Iraq. I mean, hasn't America helped Iraq enough?
Well, I would. What we just heard was that the war in Syria was fabricated, but they can go back further, as you're saying, to 2003, the fabricated reasons for invading Iraq. And let's face it, without that invasion, we wouldn't have the Islamic State. This is foreign policy by whack-a-mole. You hit down Saddam, and the Islamic State pops up. They're going to hit them down, and what's going to come after that? It's either complete incompetence on the part of the United States, or they want chaos there, as you said in the opening, to reorder the situation there. And also, it's very true that this was created, Islamic State, very much by the Gulf states, Qatar and Saudi Arabia, funding this group. Also the United States, who trained moderates, so-called moderates, and they went and joined Islamic State after they were defeated by Islamic State. A lot of them joined and brought their American weapons with them. So this is a Frankenstein that was created, and they have to destroy it now. And I know that in the theory of humanitarian intervention or responsibility to protect, there's always the suspicion of a motive, of a hidden motive. Well, the United States has already intervened there. So, I mean, can they leave that situation the way it is? And how do you fix it? I don't think they can. I think they've created such a disaster there that bombing now will not fix it. But leaving it alone will also create absolute madness, because this is a very evil group. There's no question about it.
Okay, well, Nadim, but it's quite interesting. It looks like this Islamic State, ISIS, really wants a fight with the West, particularly with the United States. Because let's look at the recent history. In this century, the United States has not won one single military conflict in that region whatsoever. And they usually, all they do is create more blowback against themselves and everyone else in the region. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about dumb wars, I think that there were many dumb wars in the region, but the 2003 invasion was not the dumbest of all. I think encouraging the Iran-Iraq war was dumb. It has lots of consequences on the region in terms of the Shia-Sunni divide and the Arab-Iranian divide. I think not intervening to help the Iraqis when Saddam was massacring the Kurds and the Shias and the Marsh Arabs was dumb. We should have protected them. I think that the sanctions were probably dumb too. And the oil for food was not very clever because it strengthened Saddam. So we have to look at a wider perspective. What happened before 2003?
Yeah, but I mean, what I think the overall thing, Nadine, the overall thing here, I agree with some of the things you're saying, okay? But Scott, I mean, the overall thing here is it's Western intervention, armed military intervention. This is not bringing anything good to the region.
I think it was.
Let me go to Scott in Orlando. Go ahead, Scott. Go ahead, Scott.
No, can I just say just finish my idea?
All right, go ahead.
That I think it was also dumb not to intervene in Syria in 2011 and stop the massacre that President Assad was doing in the country, using chemical weapons and using barrel bombs and
all right, Scott, you're disagreeing. Go ahead,
and
Scott.
Destroying the country, and that's what.
Okay, you're making a point. Let's go. This is crosstalk. Go ahead, Scott. You want to reply to that?
So that's ridiculous, saying that the U.S. should intervene in Syria. U.S. was instigating that war alongside. I mean, that was a time that they were destroying Libya at the same time. This is a long-standing problem with Western policy in the region. And Nadim is right. I mean, the Iran-Iraq war was fueled by the West, was fueled by the Americans. You know, we talked about earlier before the show, the Kuwait war. They gave the nod to Saddam to go ahead and attack Kuwait. And then after he did, you know, they started putting out propaganda. Everybody remembers the babies out of incubators. That was propaganda. And this is the problem with the West. The West has been doing the bidding of the banking infrastructure and all of their NATO partner allies, that since Sykes-Picot, they've been basically meddling in the Middle East illegally, shipping arms to people that shouldn't have gotten arms, and creating wars. And these wars are being created not only to control the assets, but also to control the region. As these governments become more powerful, they become more of a fight for the banking community that really is controlling the world. And by that, I mean, these are countries that are operating outside the banking community. That's one thing that they did not like about Libya. That's one thing that they do not like about Iran. It's a 250-year-old banking system built in Europe. And this 250-year-old banking system that runs the world, the IMF, the World Bank, all of these individuals are in control of our militaries and are in control of our politicians. And that's what we're up against. We're up against a financial community that has been in control.
Hang on here, guys. Let me go to Joe real quick. Joe, I want to go to Joe. You said something, Joe, when your first comment is intentional chaos. Go with that, because that's something it's crossed my mind many, many times. Because what's the downside for the West, unless it's blowback in their own countries, which they may face, okay? But outside of that, you just keep churning it around until you reset it. They think they can finally reset it in a way that will work. And it's just like it's like a game of roulette. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if they have control of the situation now. They might think that they could, and they could have controlled chaos. But this might be uncontrolled chaos. And I should point out, Russia 3 years ago, at the beginning of the Syrian civil war, was warning the West that, hey, we don't really like Assad very much, but if you back these rebels, we're going to have an explosion of extremism in the region that's going to come back and haunt Europe and Russia, and that's exactly what's happened. But they went ahead with this, and I don't think they really know what they're doing. I'm not saying I know the answer, whether they purposely want this chaos so that they can impose a solution.
Well, they really are trying to control
They should,
the chaos.
as you pointed out, realize by now they can't. Yeah, but they can't. As you pointed out, they've lost every war there. They don't have control.
They don't have control. Let me go to Nadim.
I think they're deluding themselves.
Let me go to London here. If ISIS in the Islamic State is so bad and so evil, then why don't the strange bedfellows like the United States talk with Iran, make Saudi Arabia talk to Iran, talk to Assad, and contain this evil cancer? This is the kind of language that's being used. Yes. But no, just bomb,
yes,
bomb, bomb, bomb. And it never works. You can't bomb extremism. Go ahead.
Peter, you can't bomb extremism, but that's exactly what the Assad regime has been doing to its own people with the help of Iran and with the help of Russia, I would add, even though we are on Russian TV. So I don't think that Joe is suggesting that we should have helped President Assad bomb his own people instead of supporting the uprising against him. This is a regime that's been there for over 50 years, and there was a revolt against it. So, the people have the right to revolt.
Nadim, I want to ask a very simple question of you. This has nothing to do with ISIS. It has everything to do with Syria, right? It has everything to do with Syria, right?
It does have something to do.
Is this all about Syria? It's not about ISIS.
ISIS has to do with Syria. What the Assad regime has done, in order to be, it has created a greater evil in order to look like the lesser evil. And I don't think we should fall into that trap.
Let me ask Scott that. This is Assad's fault. Assad created ISIS, right? Yeah. Go ahead, Scott. That's I've never heard this before.
Yeah, no way. This is absurd. This is absolutely absurd. Assad did not create ISIS. You have to take under consideration the Syrian National Coalition comes out of the Al-Haqqani government. The Al-Haqqani government only makes up about 2% of the entire population, 22 million people. And every one of, even the last president, the so-called president of the Syrian National Coalition, Ahmed Jarba, this was another puppet from the West. This is a region that's been known very well for transporting illicit drugs and all types of illicit arms through the valleys up in these mountains up in the Kurdish areas. This is a region that the Americans have been operating for over 30 years. So, no, this is not a legitimate uprising. This uprising was created, was fabricated, and Assad had to defend himself. Assad didn't attack anyone.
Okay, gentlemen, I have to jump in here. I have to jump in here. We're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on the Islamic State. Stay with our team.
I love you.
Okay, I'd like to go back to Joe in New York. I find this whole rhetoric about fighting ISIS, the Islamic State, very confusing. Why they say it might take over 3 years, where do they get this number here? We have seen a number of armed military interventions in the region in this century. They never seem to work. They leave chaos and destruction in their wake. Why do they think it's going to be different this time?
I don't know if they think that. They're saying that. I don't really know what they think. I think they're desperate to try to fix a huge problem that they helped create in Mount Washington. And as you say, bombing is the only thing that seems to be the way they can deal with this right now. And the likelihood that it will only spread violence and create more instability, which Obama in his speech to the UN this week has said that the UN should bring stability to the region. Well, the U.S. has helped create that instability. Now they're pretending they're coming in on a white horse to solve a problem that they themselves created. But I think a big question here that you raised in the introduction, Peter, is what is the end game here? If they should neutralize the Islamic State, what happens to these so-called moderates that they will be training and fighting on the ground? Because they need to, well, they're going to turn to Damascus. Will the U.S. provide the air cover to these rebels the way they did in Libya, to use the Libyan model, and we see how that's turned out? And Libya and Syria is far more complex with a lot more civilians at stake there. That's what I want to know. And they have no answer for this right now, whether that's what's going to happen 2 or 3 years down the line.
Well, I have an answer if you want me to.
Go ahead, Nadim, jump in. Go ahead in London. Go ahead.
Yes. I mean, the chaos that we are seeing in Libya is a consequence of having had 40 years of a Gaddafi regime, which is a brutal dictatorship that had, in a way, paralyzed the whole of society. It's not the consequence of the removal of the dictatorship. And in a way,
come on, Nadim. You're saying, are you saying it's better today in Libya than when Gaddafi was a ruler there? Are you saying that here? That it was better? It's better today than then?
I think,
go ahead.
Yeah, Peter. This is a very classic trap that people use, that it was better in Iraq when Saddam was there, and it's better in Syria with Assad, and it's better with Gaddafi.
Was it better under King Idris?
There is a
well, a million people are still alive.
I think it is. I think it is a fallacy to think that the only solution for the people of the region is to be under brutal dictatorships. and to be suppressed. And
okay,
on
so
the contrary,
the alternative is Western military intervention. That's the alternative. Go ahead, Scott. I don't understand that. You know, that's just destroying societies and states.
I don't understand where Nadeem.
Go ahead.
Nadeem is off his rocker. I mean, you got to be kidding me. It was better under King Idris.
Well,
King Idris was far more despotic than Saddam Hussein.
If we keep this, sorry,
I apologize, sir. I apologize. King Idris was far more despotic.
I'm being polite with you. And I would rather you criticize ideas.
He apologized, Nadeem. He did apologize on air. Okay, he did apologize. Okay,
I reject. I refuse the apology.
So King Idris was far more brutal a dictator than anyone that's ever ruled over Libya than maybe Mussolini and Grazia. These are the kinds of things that Libya has been through. And for the first time, they built one of the most powerful nations in the history of Africa. It had the best water system, free education, free medical. People weren't starving, free bread. I mean, this was one of the best nations that was ever constructed in the entire continent of Africa. So to say he was a brutal dictator, certainly he wasn't the best guy, but there was only about 12,000 people in prison in a country of 6 million. It was a profitable country. People were living well. They were subsidizing vehicles. So, no, you are absolutely wrong on your analysis of Libya. I'm an expert on Libya, and I can talk to you for days about what was different there. And the fact is that the Americans are creating this chaos, and now they're strategically going back and taking out specific devices. They're taking out all the vehicles that they've stolen from Iraq. They're taking out all the oil refineries. They're taking out all the actual assets that this mercenary army that they let loose. And then they're going to allow them to use small arms and do small arms and just slaughter individuals and then continue to say how bad they are, because you can't take away their small arms. But it's very simple for them to take out. They took out 12 oil refineries. And they're taking out, again, every one of these MRAPs and these, all of these Humvees.
Right, let me go to New York here. Let me go to Joe. Let me go to Joe in New York here. Joe, one of the things in looking at what's happened with the changes in the region is that you can get some jihadists, and in this case, the Sunni jihadists, motivated, paid, and trained, but you can't turn them off when you want to turn them off. And this is the nightmare that Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries have created for themselves, along with a lot of American help and money and just pure stupidity.
Absolutely. There's no question about it. They've created this monster that they wanted to use to overthrow Assad, and now that threatens them. And that's why it has to be taken care of. That's why they're joining this coalition in one form or the other. And it's also why, interestingly, the United States has now been speaking in public for the first time that I know of, what they only spoke in private to the Gulf potentates, and that is you have to cut off financing, you've got to stop these preachers on TV inciting sectarian hatred, and you've got to stop proxy wars. Obama said at the UN that the two major regional powers, he didn't name them, but they're Saudi Arabia, of course, and Iran, have to come together to negotiate to end the proxy wars. This is long overdue. Obviously, this is the solution. So many problems in the regions, from Beirut all the way to Kabul. And the U.S. is now saying stop the financing. The Germans have said openly that Qatar was financing Islamic State. We never heard this from the West before. So now they've realized what the hell they created with the financing, with the incitement, with these preachers. The West said nothing about this before because it was serving their interests. Now it's not serving anyone's interests, except it looks like the Islamic State's interest of their own. And that's why everyone is ganging up with the Iranians, the Syrians, the U.S., the Gulf. They're all together on the same side at the moment against Islamic State because they created this in a laboratory, a monstrous force to try to overthrow Assad. And look what's happened. It failed, and they have to defeat it now. And who knows what's going to happen.
Nadeem, what is your prognosis here? I mean, could we?
Well, my prognosis is that the disagreement we have is very clear. I think your other two participants think that there was nothing wrong with the Middle East under Gaddafi, Assad, and Saddam Hussein.
I'm not saying that at all.
Kept them in power.
That's not the truth.
And I'm saying that the world is much better off without these dictatorships. And so will the Middle East.
Yeah, but Nadeem, how does that move us forward here? I don't understand your position whatsoever. Because what I keep saying, my position is very clear. My position is very clear. Continuing military intervention in the Middle East, like the West has been doing for the last, let's say, 15 years, does not work. Why do they keep doing it? Go ahead, Nadeem.
Well, I think that military intervention is sometimes necessary, and it is not true that it's always leads to bad results. The intervention in 1990-91 to get Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait was a successful one, and I think the mistake was not continuing and getting rid of Saddam at the time. The transition in Iraq would have been much better. I think the real division, in opinion, is between so-called realists who think that you have to deal with the dictators as long as they do your bidding and your interest, and that the choice is that between two evils, and you work with the lesser evil. I think that sort of thinking is what led to where we are today, whereas the interest of the people of the region is ignored, and when the people of the region revolt against the dictatorships, I think this is when they need to be supported.
All right. You know, but Scott, you know, through the entire history of modern Middle East, the West has supported dictators in the Middle East against the people on the ground. Go ahead, Scott.
So there was no revolt against Gaddafi either, and no doubt, you know, dictators, these guys are not the best. But at the end of the day, millions of people have been killed, and millions of people would disagree with this individual that their life was better when they were alive. So Gaddafi didn't kill people. Yeah. There's been thousands, hundreds of thousands killed in Libya. There's been millions killed in Iraq. So the result is the result. Excuse me, sir, I didn't talk over you. Excuse me, sir, I did not talk over you. The fact remains. The fact remains. At the end of the day. You have a regime that is controlling people, but that doesn't give you the right to go in and murder those people and then cause chaos in that country to continue those illegal wars. And these are very profitable wars. And don't forget the partner of Israel. Israel is also a partner in these wars, the silent part. They're most secretive and hushed up. You never hear about their activity. There are hundreds and hundreds of Israelis involved in this same activity that's going on out of Saudi Arabia and Qatar. And Qatar is by far the spearhead putting together this national coalition, this false national coalition that is supposedly uprising against Syria. As I said earlier, it's a very small percentage, less than 2%. And it's a country of 22 million. So, no, these are not revolts. These are interventions, and these interventions are illegal by international law.
I want to go with that. Joe, I want to go with that in New York here. I find it very distressing that we have 2003, the illegal invasion of Iraq, and now we have another new war that is way beyond international law. But as an hegemon, nothing can stop the United States if it wants to go to war. That's very tragic.
Yeah, their argument is Chapter 51 of the UN Charter gives self-defense gives Iraq the right to self-defense, and the U.S., in very creative interpretation of that Article 51 of self-defense, says that they can go across borders to attack someone who is threatening Iraq, which is Syria. So that's the basis of it. But it's flimsy. There's no legal argument. I mean, they had meetings at the UN on this, and no one is even raising that about the legality of the U.S. action. And I want to just respond to Nadeem, because I never said that there were no problems under Saddam or under Gaddafi. That's ridiculous. This is really tragic that there's two terrible choices here. A dictator that keeps his extremists out, and Gaddafi did say that al-Qaeda would come to Libya.
Joe, I'm sorry, I have to jump in here. We have run out of time, gentlemen. I'm very sorry. Many thanks to my guests in Orlando, New York, and in London. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, CrossTalk rules.
I love you.